everyone, and welcome to the PKM post draft power rankings, where I'll go over all the teams and rank them in accordance to how strong I think they are, based purely on draft alone. Um, and yeah, I'll just go over each team, give a quick analysis on what I think each team's weaknesses are and what could be improved upon. So hopefully it's educational in that facet, and that teams can possibly make transactions to cover the weaknesses, or at the very least be aware of them. So yeah, I guess before getting into it, typical power rankings intro. It is purely my opinion. My opinion could be wrong. And if you do have a bad draft, you will not necessarily lose every game. And if you have a good draft, you'll not necessarily win every game. There's a lot of factors that go into battling than just drafts, and this is just ranking just drafts alone in my eyes. So yeah, with that out of the way, we'll move into number 8, which is the San Antonio Spurs, coached by Sexy Thanos. The good things about this team is that it's got a lot of power on it. Kyrim, Pincer, Cortana, Darm, quite a lot of power, and some okay momentum options with Lantern, Darm, and Zapdos. But this team has some serious flaws on it too. First of which I'll go over is not any fantastic speed tiers on mods. The fastest being Cart, and Cart's not that hard to take down. Pincer and Kyrim, Zapdos, all kind of in the same speed tier, where he's going to struggle to really outrun and put pressure on more offensive teams. He does have a massive amount of power though, so he does have that going for him, and his power is quite fast, especially in the case of Pincer and Kyrim and Cart. But he has some major flaws. Biggest one being his rock weakness. Any form of offense you see on his team here is weak to rocks. He's got Pincer quad weak to it, Kyrim regularly weak, Zapdos regularly weak, Darm regularly weak. So pretty much any time he wants to use any offense, he needs to be taking rocks damage, and his defoggers and Zapdos and Finny are okay, but like nothing fantastic. So if teams are able to get up rocks versus him, he's in for a long time and gonna really struggle to do anything offensively. Cart isn't weak to rocks, but Cart also will like go down to like a fart if it's a special hit. So yeah, just going to be quite easy for other teams to take down his offense if they're able to get rocks up and maintain a speed advantage over him, which his team doesn't do a great job of combating, which is why I have him at number 8. It's primarily those main exploitable weaknesses there. Number 7, I have Max and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Biggest issue with this team is the speed. He's got Weavile, which is solid, but like nothing fantastic. It more specializes in trapping and possibly like cleaning late games. Like the thing's only has 120 attack, which is like good but nothing special. And the stabs are good, but it's like not the kind of offensive mon you want to rely on for all of your offensive presence, which Max has to do here because his next fastest threat is Bulu and Tran, which are in the 70s. Magearna's in the 60s. Gliscor is like not an offensive threat. T-Tar is in the 70s. Kun is in the 80s, but it's also Suicune. Gardevoir, like his team is just incredibly slow. So he's going to have a massively hard time doing anything. Like he doesn't even have like, when I was going over Sexy Thanos and like some other teams, I'll have an issue with them where like, you know, they don't have too many mons over 100. He doesn't have things over 80. So he's gonna have some really like even basic walls of the opponent's team will be able to outrun his entire team, which is going to be really problematic for him. And really like maintaining an advantage, he'll be forced to run lots of Scarfers and really heavily rely on Weavile, and when rocks go up, Weavile becomes very limited in the number of times it'll be able to switch in. Apart from that, he does have some really good defensive backbone in Bulu Tran. He did a good job in drafting more steals and things that allow McGearna to flow into an offensive role. Because although its defensive capabilities can be accessed if needed, they don't have to be, because he has mons that can take on that role like Heatran if needed. And he has Bulu to weaken Earthquakes versus Magearna. So it's not all bad here, but there's a lot of bad. Also, Grass kind of cucks his team, with only Gear and Tran resisting it. And Grass moves of the opponents being boosted by Bulu. So, yeah, primarily speed is the issue. There's some other issues, but yeah, speed control is the biggest one. Yeah, I guess that's it for Max. So move on to number 6, which is Plasma and the Florida Frostlass. If you look at the first 5 mons here, that is some absolutely smoking power. The slowest one being like Lando I at 101, but Lando I being obscenely powerful, and then like next slowest being Torn, because we're counting Hawlucha at like permanently 600 speed or something ridiculous. Yeah, these guys just all have a ton of momentum, ton of power, and they can really kind of make their opponent's head spin with them kind of like going back and forth between each other and breaking, because all of them are incredibly fast and incredibly hard to switch into, and cause damage even when you're trying to switch into them, and do so successfully. So incredibly threatening first 5 there. Mainly the 4 outside of Hawlucha, although Hawlucha can be a decent sweeper. Those 4, being Coco, Torn, Beedrill, and Lando, are incredibly powerful and incredibly threatening for an offensive team. However, it kind of goes downhill from there because the rest of his team's pretty dog shit. Ice and Fire will kind of completely run through him, especially Fire. Poison to some extent too. He has to rely a lot on Bronzong, and Bronzong's really not ready to take on that level of heat. So he's really gonna just try and win by completely out-offensing his opponents at all times, and if his opponent's able to outpace him, and with like strong Scarfers or just anything that's faster than his team in general, he's gonna have a hard time switching into that, and he's going to be in for a long battle. So the sheer raw power of the his offensive members, and the fact that they are quite fast and difficult to outrun, makes his team quite good, which is why I have him at number 6 over the lower ones. But like I said before, the weaknesses are definitely still glaring, which is why he can't be any higher. Number 5, we have I guess his name's Franck, or at least that's what's written on the doc. Maybe that's Frank. And the Quebec Quagsires. Quebec is French, so maybe it's just the French way of writing Frank. I don't know. Anyways, his team's the first one that's really, I'd say, decently well balanced. It has a similar problem to the ones before, where it doesn't have great top end speed, with Garchomp being the fastest mon, but it's not like Max's where it drops all the way down to 70. He's got Manaphy, Volk, Togekiss. He's got some okay fast mons still around. This team's just kind of awkward. So Chomp is fantastic, and it serves the team well, but it's kind of being over-relied on here for pretty much use in the mid-game, I'd say. His team is full of mons that really don't like to see, or at least his offense, his strong offensive members are really mons that don't like to see the game until the very end. Manaphy, you don't really ever want to bring in on things because it wants to preserve all of its health to take hits while setting up. Same thing with Volk. So you really never want to bring them in on hits, but what else are you going to bring in on hits to actually get something done and get something offensive in to start doing some damage. Mega Maw maybe, but every team is going to be doing their absolute hardest to keep Mega Maw out at all times, and Mega Maw is quite slow and usually wants to come in without taking a hit in the first place anyways. So I think he's going to have to really rely on Chomp a lot early game and to mid game to really break, especially because he has very little momentum to get in Maw for free. Rotom Mo is really the only option for it. Other than that, he's got Scarm and Togekiss, which he can go into early to mid game to really do stuff, but they're both quite passive mons. Togekiss can run Nasty Plot, I suppose, but then I don't know. It's definitely not a super threatening breaker. It's not that hard to handle. So I think he's gonna kind of struggle with mid-game pressure, because he does have a decent defensive backbone, but his only having setup sweepers, or at least primarily having setup sweepers, is going to kind of limit him. Whereas I think having that kind of setup spam would have worked on hyper offense, but his team kind of lends itself to being a more bulky offense build. I guess that's about it. It's definitely by no means a bad team. I just think it's going to be kind of awkward for him to play early to mid game because he doesn't have very many mons that excel at doing that besides Garchomp, and Rotom-O to some extent. But it's also the first mostly balanced team without any giant glaring weaknesses. Also, speaking of that, I completely forgot to mention on Sexy Thanos' team, his Rocker's Pinsir, which is also a giant weakness, which is why he's rated that low, along with all of the other reasons I said before. But yeah. Number 4, we have Mars, and his team is fast as fuck. He's got 3 offensive members that, with the slowest of his offensive trifecta here being Lopunny, which is a scary thought that Lopunny is the slowest of your offensive members. So this team is blazing fast. He'll be able to completely outpace any offensive team in the league with ease. So he'll really be able to keep advantage on and keep his opponent switching into him at all times. And that's a really powerful option. That's why teams who lacked really any mons who are very fast and powerful, I've been ranking quite low, because they're unable to really apply pressure effectively. Mars has 3 mons that do that incredibly effectively, and also synergize with each other fairly well, with Deoxys coming in on fighting hits to Lopunny, and then Celesteela kind of gluing them all together, and then Zeraora supporting it by taking electric moves. I think this team could handle us, or its defensive backbone is a bit frail. It's not weak by any means, but it's definitely not strong. Celesteela is solid, but it's definitely liable to being worn down over the course of a game, just because it has no natural recovery outside of Leech Seed. And Celesteela will certainly be forced into a defensive role every single week, which is not necessarily a bad thing when you have offenses strong. But yeah, I think the defense is just a little frail, and and his offense, although it's incredibly fast and incredibly powerful for how fast it is, it's not. He doesn't have anything on his team that's incredibly hard to switch into. All 3 of the extremely fast mons he has are mons that aren't super hard to wall. Things like a Slowbro, a Moongus, a Mew can easily wall out a Mew throughout the course of an entire game. Something like a Jirachi, a Metagross, a Bronzong can probably take on a Deoxys speed throughout the entire game. Something like a Nidoqueen, a Donphan, anything like that, can wall a zero throughout the game. So he'll force a lot of prep from his opponent, and checks will probably be obvious. But he will have a hard time really breaking down very fat teams that come to stop his offense. And I think he'll be susceptible to being walled out a lot in certain games. So you'll have to find a way to play around that. Other than that, his rocking options are pretty limited to Deoxys and Pylo, I think. And Deoxys typically doesn't want to run rocks, or at least I wouldn't want to run rocks always on my Deoxys. But Pylo is a pretty consistent rocker, so I don't think that's a major issue. I'd say the only thing is that it makes it predictable, and kind of forces Pylo on the team every week. But yeah, in all, I think the defense is a bit frail, and the offense, although incredibly fast and powerful, will have issues with breaking down super fat teams. Side note, this team would absolutely shit on Plasmas, because like I said before, Plasma, his team is incredibly fast and threatening, but this team outpaces that one easily and can't switch into any, and Plasma's team can't switch into anything he has, so that'll be a fun matchup, but that's just some polarity of matchups. But yeah, solid team. I really like the or I kind of want to see how this team ends up working with such fast-paced offense. But I think he might be able to benefit from really picking up something that hits extremely hard, that can really put his opponent into sacking mons, or force his opponent into sacking mons, because I think he has a little bit of an issue with that right now. Number 3, I have Freddy and the Montreal Mamswines. He has the Blaziken with speed boost, which is absolutely stupid broken. That thing's going to win probably several games this season just completely on its own, because it shouldn't be allowed, but it is. But outside of that, his team's kind of whack. He's got decent offense with like Azu, Serp, Mega Gardevoir. Jirachi's a really good Gloomon here. A lot of the things his team's weak to, Jirachi is able to kind of glue it together and make it work. But there's just kind of some whack things going on, like Hippo being here in the first place when like he has no relevant sand. Like Stoutland is not a mon. And his team's kind of walled by steel types. Like if you look, pretty much every single mon he has on his team besides Blaziken struggles with steel types. And Blaziken's not the kind of mon that you want to ever bring in on anything. Especially because most steel types have access to Earthquake. And on top of that, Blaziken you usually want to be saving for the late game anyways. I guess it could be an advantage in that like he puts so much pressure on the steel types that they really can't check everything he has, but at the same time he's going to have a hard time switching into the steel type in the first place, so it's going to be kind of awkward. Like Hippo is probably his best way of dealing with it, and that's not like a super good way to do it, especially because Hippo is really slow and kind of throws out momentum, although it does get access to rocks, which is nice. So yeah, in all, I think the team's pretty good. He kind of drafted 8 mons, which isn't inherently a bad thing, because his 8 mons he has are quite good. But like, yeah, a bit limited on variety, and has a bit issues probably breaking down certain teams, but the offense is quite good, and I think that'll carry him for a lot of matchups. Number 2, I have PK, who has a quite similar team to the teams I built for March Madness and my PSBA team, which is kind of cool. Mega Latios plus Infernape is a really neat core, and his team is generally like quite threatening and looks very hard to take down, with a lot of fat and like powerful fat. with Mew and Latios and Lando. Just a lot of really threatening, powerful mons. He also has pretty much every rocker you could ever want. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months have access to rocks. How many don't have access to rocks? 1, 2, 3. I'm bad at counting. 4. Yeah. So 6 out of 10 mons have access to rocks, and one of the ones that doesn't has access to webs. So he has every hazard that you could ever want, which is polar opposite from his UBA Season 3 draft, where he had 0 mons with access to rocks or hazards. Yeah, the team is really strong and has no super glaring weaknesses besides maybe a bit of an ice weakness, relying on Infernape to deal with it, and Infernape not being in Registeel, and neither of them being super reliable or bulky. And Ice kind of hitting some of his most important offensive members, but it's not too glaring of an issue. The biggest issue I see with the team, or not even a biggest issue, I think the team kind of just lacks a whole lot of offensive synergy. Latios and Infernape definitely go together well, but like past that, I don't see how anything like super comes together to support one another offensively. He has enough big offensive hitters to definitely cleave through any team, and he doesn't need that offensive synergy, but it's always definitely nice to have. But other than that, really threatening, well-balanced team, and I think it will do well. So moving on to number 1, I have Ruby and the Indianapolis Pawniards. And this team, I think, just kind of builds on PKs, where PKs didn't really have offensive synergy. Ruby's definitely does, and it really is really well-rounded in my opinion. So Lele is stupid broken, incredibly hard to switch into. Not a whole lot of things that do it in the first place, and then Mega Glade under terrain is nearly impossible to switch into. I'd say the mons that can do it are like there's not a whole lot of them, and the only ones that do or I guess there is like Spiritomb and Sableye can, and then there's things like Mew, Metagross, Jirachi, Bronzong, but all of them are liable to take knockoffs. So this team is incredibly threatening and going to be incredibly hard to switch into with these two menaces at the top. They're just going to completely run the show some games and be impossible to switch into and really just take down the entire team. And then on top of that, she has incredible momentum options with Rotom Wash, Incineroar, and Talonflame. In my opinion, Rotom Wash is actually the single best momentum grabbing mon in the entire game. So she has that going for her. She has Incineroar, which actually synergizes extremely well with Lele and Glade, in my opinion, coming in on the steel types that both of them, or mainly Lele brings in, but also can come in on the psychic types that Glade brings in, and is able to U-turn on them and provide even more momentum while threatening a Flare Blitz. And Rotom Wash is able to come in on flying types that are coming in to revenge Glade. Incineroar also comes in on the ghost types that are trying to threaten either of them. So yeah, just a whole lot of momentum going on. Talonflame also does the same thing to a lesser extent that both of them do. Yeah, a whole lot of momentum going on. And defensively, the team doesn't have too many weaknesses. Nidoqueen I haven't even gotten to, but is an incredible breaker. It doesn't like have any glaring synergy with the rest of the team, but I really don't think you need a whole lot of it when the first section of this team is so incredibly powerful. Dragonite is kind of similar, where it's like a good thing, but I don't see the synergy, but like it's not bad to have, and I think the first portions of the team will be able to do just fine, and Dragonite could come to a few matches and put in some work too. Main weaknesses of this team, I think, are if rocks go up, she can really struggle with opposing speed control. Like, say she's playing a Gengar or I don't know, a Torn or something that's running Scarf, or not even Scarf, like just a regular Torn. Um, she'll have a really hard time switching into moves aimed at her offense. Um, I guess Torn was a bit more of a poor example because Rotom isn't weak to rocks, but things like Ghosts, she'll have some issues switching into. It's made a bit less so by the fact that she has the option of Miltank too. But if she's ever required to switch into things that when she needs Incineroar or Talonflame, like Steels coming in on Lele, they can be issues. Also dealing with or it also breaks Dragonite's multi-scale. So I think just the team has a bit too many critical rock weaknesses, but even then it's really not that big of an issue. And I think the team is really strong. I guess another issue is speed with only Gallade and Talonflame exceeding 100, but Talonflame's actually a bit slept on in my opinion, and Gallade, especially when the train up, is going to be putting in a massive amount of work. She has viable Scarfers in Lele and Nidoqueen and even Dragonite to some extent to help out. And then Lele isn't even that far under 100, so it's not like she has terrible presence in top end speed. Something I think she did really well is probably the best value picks out of anyone in the draft, with Incineroar and Miltank both synergizing really well with Lele and Gallade. Rhydon just being, I don't know why it's 3 points, but it's definitely worth a lot more than that. And Araquanid too, actually contributing webs. All of her lower picks, Talonflame too, synergizes with Lele, coming in to beat down Steels and provide momentum and get in both Lele and Gallade and pivoting. All of her low tier picks, except besides like Togetic, which is pretty bad, provide actually a lot of good synergy and usefulness to the team, in my opinion. So yeah, that's why she's ranked number 1, and I guess that's it for the rankings.